Melbourne Central. It's one of the city's busiest places, just full of activity, but it's also an area full of history. It's not often we get to take a step back and wonder where it all came from, and that's exactly what we're going to do today.
I think it's helpful when trying to visualise the past to have a physical anchoring point for the start of a story. Luckily for us, we have Coop Tower preserved right here to do just that.
Standing at 50 metres tall, the tower was built and named after Walter Coop in 1888.
While today, Knox Lane runs straight through to the Swanston Street trams, we should turn right into here and connect to Little Lonsdale Street over there. Coop set up shop here in Knox Place because at the time, it was the manufacturing heart of Melbourne. As we turn to McIntyre Alley, you can just imagine the narrow, bustling supply lane this used to be. It's filled from everything from ironmongers to carpenters, with the busy sounds of industry ringing through the smoke and sawdust.
You can still see the shadows of the tower's neighbours from back when they were all packed together, roof to roof, chimney against chimney.
The Coops themselves were in the business of lead, particularly the making of lead shot, which are just balls of lead to be fired from a gun. To make these shots, they'd pour molten lead into a sieve at the top of the tower. As it fell, the lead would form spheres, which would be cooled and solidified by the water at the bottom. The higher the fall, the bigger you can make the shots, which is why they made a shot tower this tall. So tall, in fact, it broke the city height limits at the time and remained 6 metres taller than the city building limits even in the late 1950s. More than 70 years after it was built, the shot tower finally closed for business in 1961 as demand for lead and lead products dropped, and the doors of this great warehouse closed for the last time.
For a decade after its closing, the shop tower stood as a silent reminder of Melbourne's industrial past and quickly took on historical significance for Melburnians familiar with its prominent place in the city. When the construction of the City Loop, then called the Melbourne Underground Railway, began tunnelling under the streets in June 1972, the future of the shop tower suddenly seemed uncertain, with a railway station called Museum to be built on the very same block.
If that name sounds unfamiliar, it's because the station we're talking about was named after Melbourne Central Shopping Centre much later, in 1997, but we'll get to that in a bit. Before that, the station drew its name from the Melbourne Museum, which used to share a building with the State Library, before it moved to the Carlton Gardens, beginning in 1992.
In response to public concern about the shop tower's future, it was listed on the Victorian Heritage Register on October 9, 1974. As a result, construction of Museum Station had to be very careful about digging around the tower, while many of the surrounding stores facing Latrobe and Swanston Streets were demolished. The station was built with a cut and cover process. During this time, a large stretch of Latrobe Street was curved several metres south to accommodate the construction site. The loop opened in its first stage with Museum Station and the Burnley and Caulfield loops running on the 24th of January 1981. For the most part, the station's platforms looked much as they do now, with their characteristic white and red tiles, but the biggest difference was on the surface, where the escalators from the concourse opened out onto Queen Elizabeth Plaza, which used to sit on this very spot on the corner of Swanston and Latrobe Streets. It was named and opened by the Queen herself on May the 28th, during her 1980 visit, 8 months before the station opened.
The plaza was short-lived, however, as only 3 years later, negotiations commenced for further development of the site, which began in 1986 under Kumagai Gumi, a Japanese construction firm, in a massive $1.2 billion project, with Japanese department store Daimaru taking about half the retail space, 6 floors in total.
The early 90s saw an economic downturn which hit Australia especially hard. In the midst of this environment, Melbourne Central promised a commercial revitalisation of the city, with grand hopes of a consumer revolution.
We've got a new dynamism, and at the heart of this dynamic growth is Melbourne Central, a commercial and retail complex so ambitious, so dynamic, it will change the Melbourne experience forever.
The centre was not without its critics, however. Daimaru was a foreign competitor to the well-established names of Myer and David Jones, and was characterised as a Japanese retail assault in the age, in the midst of a surge of Asian investment, even as it was hailed as a new dawn for the heart of the city.
There were those who praised the centre for its architecture, particularly with its familiar glass cone incorporating natural light into the design. However, the centre faced some criticism as too internalised, with footbridges like this one separating the centre from the streets outside.
This article, written by Dimity Reed and published in The Age in 1991, is one example of this angle of criticism. Interestingly, she describes the shot tower as being imprisoned under the glass cone and makes the prediction that while the centre would be renovated or demolished within 30 years, the tower would emerge as it always had, simple and honest.
And as we'll see, she was half right.
Nonetheless, Melbourne Central opened to great fanfare on 11th of September 1991 and was really a mix between a retail space and a theme park, with a model hot air balloon and a biplane dangling under the cone, which welcomed over 500,000 people on its first day. Reception to the new centre was largely positive, bringing magic and money back to the city.
After the museum was moved in 1995, the City Council needed a new name for the station. This sparked a lot of discussion.
In a 1995 article published in The Age, a bid to change the name to Melbourne Central was criticised by the National Trust as being misleading, as it was not really the centre of Melbourne, suggesting that Latrobe Street Station would fit better with Flinders and Spencer Street stations.
Other names were suggested, including RMIT and the State Library, but eventually Melbourne Central was confirmed as the new name for the station and the one we use today.
In this 1997 article, it's also argued that a public feature like the station should not be named after business or commercial concerns, such as a shopping centre, and that Melbourne Central Station would be the first to break this convention.
Every single one of
Success was far from assured for the shopping centre though, as only a decade after opening, due to a variety of setbacks both at home and abroad, Daimaru closed for the last time in 2002.
Farewell, Australia. Forever.
Coincidentally, their lease, which they paid $30 million to pull out from, is only set to expire this year, 2016. From this spot, you can still see two reminders of the past. One is the iconic marionette watch, now without its original gold chain, while the other is slightly less obvious. If you look up above Hoyts, there are two semicircles jutting out. These are actually landings for the escalators which used to run up to the very top floor of Daimaru.
With half its retail space now empty, the centre was sold in its entirety to the GPT Group, an Australian property manager which runs it to this day. Under new ownership, the centre underwent a massive renovation designed by Ashton Raggett McDougall in 2002.
It was at this time that many of the distinctive features we recognise today were built, like the wooden box facade on the northeast corner, and how the centre opens out on the streets, perhaps in response to all criticism of the boxed-in, isolated shopping centre.
Of course, the story doesn't quite end there, with a continuing emphasis on fashion and food driven by a more recent renovation in 2010. However, there's a sense of constancy embodied in this shot tower, which has, as predicted, stood where it's been since 1888. It's watched as the city's changed from the industrial heartland to a thriving centre of commerce and art. Through its story, we get just a glimpse of the wider history of Melbourne that we know and love.